Have you ever been in a room full of people who love you and realized, very quietly, that some of them have been watching you the way a vulture watches a field? Not with hatred, with patience. I came home from that Thanksgiving dinner and sat in my truck in the dark for 47 minutes. I didn't go inside. I just sat there with the engine off and the windows fogging up, turning a single sentence over in my mind like a stone I'd found on a beach. Smooth, unremarkable, and somehow wrong. My sister had laughed. My daughter had looked away. And then my phone rang, and the man on the other end said 4 words that made the stone in my hand suddenly feel like the keystone of an arch I hadn't known was falling. I'll get back to that phone call, but first you need to understand who I was before that Thanksgiving. Because what Marcus and Claire were counting on, more than anything, was exactly the kind of man I had been for 61 years. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 61 years old. I live in Spokane, Washington, and I have been a Finnish carpenter for 39 years. I know wood the way a doctor knows a body. Not just the surface, but the grain underneath, the direction of the stress, the invisible lines where things will eventually split. I built the house I live in with my own hands in 1994. I drive a 2003 Ford F-150 that I have rebuilt twice from the frame up. I drink black coffee at 5 in the morning, and I do not, as a rule, explain myself to people who haven't earned the right to the explanation. My wife Dorothy died in 2018. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I will not describe those 11 weeks, except to say that they taught me something about time, about how it stretches in the wrong direction when you most need it to compress, and compresses when you need it to stretch. After Dorothy, I learned to do things slowly and carefully. I learned that silence is not the same as weakness. I learned that a man who does not raise his voice is very often the most dangerous man in the room. My daughter Claire is 34. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and for a long time I thought she also had her mother's honesty. She teaches middle school science in Bellevue. She is smart and funny, and she used to call me every Sunday morning while I drank my coffee. After she married Marcus, those calls became every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then not at all, really, unless she needed something. Marcus Holt. He is 41 years old. He works in financial consulting, a phrase that, in my experience, means different things to different people, and usually means something specific to no one. He grew up in Connecticut, went to Dartmouth, and has never, in the 6 years I have known him, done anything with his hands except type. He is tall and well-dressed, and he has the particular kind of confidence that belongs to men who have never been wrong about anything important enough to matter. He calls me Walt, in a tone that makes the name sound like a verdict. I want to be clear about something. I did not dislike Marcus from the beginning. That would make this story simpler than it is, and simpler than I deserve. The truth is that I tried. I had him and Claire over for dinner a dozen times in the first 2 years. I drove 6 hours to see them when they bought their house in Bellevue. I helped them move, my back, my truck, my weekend. I gave Claire her mother's china, which Dorothy had been saving for exactly this kind of new beginning. Marcus thanked me by telling Claire, in what he thought was a private conversation at their kitchen table 3 months after they married, that her father was a sweet guy who just never really figured it out. I know this because their kitchen window was open, and I was in the backyard moving patio furniture they'd asked me to assemble. I put the furniture together. I drove home. I did not say anything about what I had heard. That was the first time. There were others. But nothing, none of it, prepared me for Thanksgiving. But before I go on, Do me one small favor. Subscribe. A lot of people listen but never hit the button. It costs you nothing and means everything to us. Hit the like button while you listen, and drop a comment with your thoughts. You're going to want to stay for this one. It was Claire and Marcus's turn to host. They had a house in Bellevue that cost, as Marcus had mentioned no fewer than 3 times, $1.3 million, which is actually reasonable for the market. The kitchen had an island the size of a small aircraft carrier. The living room had a fireplace Marcus had never lit, and art on the walls that I recognized as expensive in the way I recognize wood. By the grain of the frame, the particular blankness of the canvas, the size of the check that had to go through. There were 8 of us for dinner. Me, Claire and Marcus, my sister Renata and her husband Greg, Claire's college roommate Sasha and her husband, and Marcus's business partner, a man named Devlin, who had arrived with a bottle of wine that cost, as Marcus noted while opening it, $240. Renata is 58. She is a good woman with a sharp tongue and a habit of laughing at things that aren't quite funny. She and Dorothy had never been close. Renata thought Dorothy was too quiet, too careful. She and Marcus, on the other hand, had gotten along from the beginning. I should have noticed what that said. The dinner itself was fine. Marcus had ordered everything from a catering service, which he explained with a kind of pride that I recognized as its own form of apology. We ate. We drank. Devlin told a long story about a ski trip. Greg told a longer story about a tax situation that resolved itself. Sasha's husband said almost nothing. I said what was necessary and no more. It happened over dessert. Marcus had been talking about a real estate investment opportunity, something he was structuring for a group of high-net-worth clients. He used the word structure 4 times in 3 minutes. Claire was cutting the pie. Devlin was listening with the attentiveness of a man who expected to profit. And then Renata, laughing, full of wine, meaning it as a joke, turned to me and said, "You should get in on something like this, Walt. Unless you're still broke." She laughed. Claire looked down at the pie. Marcus smiled the way a man smiles when he's just heard something useful. I set down my fork. I looked at Renata. I said very quietly, "I'm comfortable." "Oh, I know, Renata said, still laughing, waving her hand. "I just mean, you know, you never really did the investment thing. Dorothy always said—" "Dorothy," I said a lot of things. The table got quiet. Not for long. Marcus pivoted smoothly into something about market timing, and the conversation moved. But the quiet had been there. Everyone had felt it. I finished my coffee. I thanked Claire for dinner. I drove home. I sat in my truck in the dark for 47 minutes, and then my phone rang. The number was a Spokane area code I didn't recognize. I answered because Dorothy had once told me that the calls you almost don't answer are the ones that matter. The man on the other end said, "Is this Walter Briggs, father of Claire Briggs Holt?" I said yes. He said, "Mr. Briggs, my name is Raymond Carr. I'm a forensic accountant. I think you need to hear what I've found." I had never spoken to Raymond Carr before that night. I did not know his name. I did not know what a forensic accountant did exactly, beyond what the word forensic implies. Something after the fact. Something that pieces together what happened from what was left behind. I know now. I know it the way I know finish work. You don't see the craft in the thing itself. You see it in what's been hidden, and how well. Raymond Carr had been hired 8 months earlier by a woman named Patricia Okoye. Patricia was a widow in her early 70s who had invested, on Marcus's recommendation and through his firm, the better part of her late husband's estate into a fund that Marcus had structured for his clients. $314,000. The fund had, according to Marcus, underperformed due to market volatility. Patricia was now receiving quarterly statements showing a balance of $61,000, and she had begun to suspect, with a particular clarity that comes to people who have been careful their whole lives, that something was wrong. Raymond had found something. Several somethings. And in the course of his work, he had found a name that had appeared in two places it shouldn't have been. Mine. "Your signature appears on a document dated March of last year," Raymond said. "A limited partnership agreement. You are listed as a contributing investor. $22,000. I was quiet for a moment. The windshield had fogged completely. I couldn't see the street. "I have never signed a partnership agreement with Marcus," I said. "No," Raymond said. "I didn't think you had. Here is what I want you to understand about the next 60 seconds, because I need you to understand it before I continue. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I did not feel, in any dramatic sense, the floor drop out from under me. What I felt was something much quieter and much colder. I felt the particular sensation of a carpenter who has just run his hand along a beautiful piece of work and found, deep in the grain, a crack that was there from the beginning, and who understands in that instant that the crack was always there, and that the beauty was always built around it. I sat in my truck. My coffee from the drive home was on the dash, cold now, in the blue enamel mug Dorothy had given me for our 25th anniversary. I looked at the mug. I thought about the Thanksgiving table. I thought about Renata laughing. I thought about Claire looking down at the pie. "How long?" I said. "The earliest document I've found with your name," Raymond said, "is dated June of 2021. June of 2021. Dorothy had been gone 3 years by then. Claire and Marcus had been married for 1. "Mr. Briggs?" "I'm here," I said. "There's more." If you've been listening and want more stories like this, it takes one tap: subscribe. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments what you think happened next. Thank you, genuinely. I met Raymond Carr in person 2 days later at a coffee shop on the south side of Spokane. The kind of place where the tables are small and the ambient noise is enough to make a private conversation stay private. He was younger than he'd sounded on the phone. Mid-40s, trim, glasses, a leather portfolio that he set on the table between us like evidence at a hearing. He was, I would come to understand, a careful man. Careful in the way that careful men are when they have spent years looking at paper and finding that the paper lies, not loudly but structurally, in the architecture of what it claims to prove. He ordered green tea. I ordered black coffee. We did not make small talk. He opened the portfolio and began to lay documents on the table one at a time. He did not explain them as he placed them. He let me look. He understood without being told that I was the kind of man who needed to see a thing with his own eyes before he would believe it, and that once I had seen it, I would not need to be told what it meant. The first document was the partnership agreement. My name, my date of birth, my address, a signature that was mine in the way a good forgery is always mine. The right hand pressure, the correct slant, the particular way I write the capital B. But the date was wrong. The notarization seal was from a county I had never been in, and the account number listed for my contribution was not an account I had ever held. The second document was a statement from that account, an account in my name, opened 18 months after Dorothy died, at a credit union in Bellevue. I had not opened that account. I had not known it existed. It had received, over the course of 14 months, 6 deposits totaling just over $41,000. It had sent, over the same period, 6 corresponding transfers to Marcus's firm. I looked at the statement for a long time. Who opened this account? I said. Raymond set down a third document, a copy of the account application. The signature on the application was mine. The email address listed was not. The email address, I said. It was opened through a provider that no longer operates, Raymond said. But the account registration was done from an IP address in Bellevue, Washington. At a time when you were, according to your phone records, which you provided, in Spokane. I thought about June of 2021. What had I been doing in June of 2021? I had been refinishing the hardwood floors in my upstairs hallway. I had been planting the tomatoes Dorothy always planted, because I didn't know what else to do with the raised bed she'd built. I had been driving my truck to the hardware store and back, listening to the radio, doing what a man does when he is learning, very slowly, how to live alone. And in Bellevue, someone had been opening accounts in my name. Marcus, I said. The IP address resolves to a business address registered to his firm, Raymond said. Yes. I picked up my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. There's something else, Raymond said. There always is. He set down a fourth document. A photograph, printed from a phone, a little blurry, but clear enough. It was a scan of a document. The document was a power of attorney. It authorized the holder, Marcus Elliott Holt, to act on behalf of Walter James Briggs in all financial matters, including investment decisions, account management, and the execution of legal documents. It was signed, notarized, and dated August of 2022. I had been in Spokane in August of 2022. I had been building a deck for my neighbor, Phil Gutierrez. I remembered the exact week because it was the hottest August in 20 years, and Phil had brought me a fan from his garage. And I had built that deck in 103-degree heat, one board at a time, and not once had I signed a power of attorney. My daughter, I said. Raymond did not answer immediately. The notarization is from a notary in Bellevue, he said. The notary's name is on file. I have not yet established who was present at the signing. He was being careful. He was a careful man. But I had run my hand along the grain of this piece of work, and I knew where it had split. I set down the photograph. I put my hands flat on the table. I looked out the window at the street. How much? I said. Total. Everything you've found. Raymond opened the portfolio to the last page. At minimum, he said, $63,000 attributed to your name. There are other investors. The total, across all accounts, may be considerably higher. I am still documenting. I nodded. And Patricia Okoye. Her funds are unlikely to be recoverable without legal action, Raymond said. That is why she hired me. I thought about Patricia Okoye. I did not know her. I had never met her. She was a widow in her early 70s who had been careful her whole life. And someone had taken $314,000 from her and given her statements she couldn't read and a vocabulary she didn't have. And now she had $61,000 left and a forensic accountant and my daughter's phone number somewhere in a chain of events she didn't fully understand yet. What do you need from me? I said. Your cooperation, Raymond said, and your documentation, bank records, tax returns, anything that establishes your actual financial history. You'll have it by Friday, I said. He closed the portfolio. Mr. Briggs, he said, I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Your daughter, Claire, do you believe she knew? I thought about that Thanksgiving table. I thought about the pie. I thought about her eyes, Dorothy's eyes, looking down at the crust while Renata laughed about my money. I thought about the Sunday phone calls that had stopped, the Christmas visit that had been cut short, the way she'd laughed 2 years ago at something Marcus had said about old-school guys who keep their savings in a sock drawer. I thought about all the times I had explained something away because the alternative was something I could not afford to look at directly. Yes, I said. I think she knew. Raymond nodded once. "Then we proceed carefully," he said. I drove home. I parked the truck in the garage. I went inside and stood in my kitchen and looked at the countertops I had installed myself in 1998, the cabinets I had built from scratch, the floor I had laid on my hands and knees while Dorothy supervised from the doorway with a coffee and a running commentary on my technique. I stood there for a long time. Then I went to my office, a small room off the back of the house that had once been Dorothy's sewing room and was now bookshelves and a desk and filing cabinets. And I opened the bottom drawer of the second cabinet and took out the leather ledger I had kept since 1987. Dorothy had given me that ledger. Not as a gift. She had bought it at an office supply store because I had complained that I kept losing receipts. She had bought it and handed it to me without ceremony and said, "Keep everything in here. You'll be glad someday." She was right about most things. The ledger was 3/4 full. 39 years of entries in my own handwriting. Every job, every invoice, every payment, every account I had ever held, every investment I had ever made, every financial decision I had ever recorded, in chronological order, in blue ink, in my own hand. It was the most complete record of a financial life that I had ever seen outside a courtroom, and I had kept it entirely by accident, out of a habit my wife had given me, and a personality that did not trust what it could not touch. I set the ledger on the desk. I opened it to the first page. I began to read. I need to tell you what I found, because what I found was not what I expected, and what I expected was already bad enough. I had kept, without knowing their purpose, records that made it possible to demonstrate, with very little ambiguity, that I had not signed the documents Raymond had shown me. Not just because I was in Spokane, although I was, and I could prove it, but because the accounts those documents referenced, the financial activity those documents described, were entirely inconsistent with any decision I had ever made or any account I had ever held. But I also found something else, something I had not looked for. In my ledger, in my own hand, in October of 2021, I had recorded a conversation. I keep notes on conversations sometimes, Dorothy's habit, absorbed into mine over 30 years of marriage. A sentence or two about what was said and who said it. Not always, but when something struck me as worth remembering. The entry read, "Marcus called, asked about the house. What do you think it would appraise for these days? Said he was curious. Told him I hadn't looked. He said, 'You should. You might be surprised.' Didn't explain what he meant. I had forgotten that call. I had written it down and forgotten it. Now I read it, and I understood exactly what he had meant. He had been looking at my house in 2021. The house I built in 1994, on land I had owned since 1989, in a Spokane neighborhood that had, in the last 5 years, become considerably more valuable than anyone had predicted when I paid $8,000 for the lot. He had been thinking about my house before he opened accounts in my name, before he forged my signature, before he built, piece by piece, a structure that had my name at its foundation. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. His name is Ed Nakamura. He has been my attorney for 22 years. He did my business incorporation and Dorothy's estate and the contract dispute I had with a contractor in 2009 that resolved itself, as Ed put it, decisively. He answered on the second ring, which is how Ed answers, and I told him what I had found and what Raymond Carr had told me. And I told him about the ledger. When I was finished, Ed was quiet for a moment. "Walter," he said, "do you want to pursue this criminally, civilly, or both?" "Both," I said. "Do you want Claire named?" I looked at the ledger. I thought about Dorothy's eyes. I want the truth established, I said. What the truth requires, we'll do. I did not call Claire. I did not call Marcus. I did not call Renata, who had left me a voicemail the day after Thanksgiving, saying she hoped I hadn't taken her joke the wrong way. That she was just being silly, that I knew she loved me. I listened to the voicemail twice and did not return it. What I did for the next 3 weeks was work. I built a set of built-in bookshelves for a retired couple on the South Hill who had been on my waiting list for 8 months. I finished a kitchen renovation I'd started in October. I rebuilt the tailgate on my truck. I drank my coffee at 5 in the morning, and I read my ledger in the evenings, and I corresponded with Raymond and Ed, and did not sleep particularly well, and did not particularly mind. I want to be precise about something. I was not calm because I was not angry. I was calm because I was angry in the particular way that is useful, the kind that does not burn things down, but burns cleanly and steadily, like a wood stove properly loaded. I had been a Finnish carpenter for 39 years. I knew the difference between the fire that makes a mess and the fire that makes heat. I knew how to wait. On December 7th, 3 weeks and 1 day after Thanksgiving, Ed called me. "We have enough," he said. "For what?" "For criminal referral," he said. "Forgery, identity theft, financial fraud. Raymond's documentation is complete enough for the DA's office to move on. Patricia Okoye's attorney has filed a civil suit. You can attach to it or you can file separately. My recommendation is separately, because your damages are distinct and you are a more sympathetic plaintiff." "What about Claire?" A pause. "Raymond found her name on one document," Ed said. "A correspondence, an email, that references the power of attorney. The language is ambiguous. She may have known the document existed without knowing it was forged, or she may have known exactly what it was." He paused again. "There is also the question of what she knew about the other investors." "Patricia Okoye." "And 2 others," Ed said. "An elderly man in Redmond, a retired couple in Kirkland. All of them introduced to Marcus's fund through—" He stopped. "Through what?" "Through a referral network," Ed said carefully. "The referral source, in all cases, was a personal connection of Marcus's wife." I was quiet. "Claire referred them," I said. "That's what the documentation suggests," Ed said. "Yes." I thought about the middle school. I thought about 12-year-olds learning about photosynthesis and the water cycle and the scientific method, which says that you follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when you don't like where it goes. I thought about Dorothy, about what Dorothy would say. Dorothy would not have said anything, I think. She would have made coffee. She would have handed me the mug, the blue enamel one, our 25th anniversary, the chip on the rim from the time she dropped it and caught it on the way down, and she would have sat across the table and looked at me in the way she looked at me when she wanted me to think before I spoke. I thought before I spoke. "Ed," I said, "is there anything we can do to ensure that Claire is given the opportunity to cooperate?" "She can approach the DA voluntarily," Ed said. "If she provides testimony against Marcus, the disposition of her case would be at the DA's discretion. It would help her." "Would it help the other investors?" "Yes." "Then make sure someone tells her that," I said. "Not me. Someone from the DA's office. Or Raymond. Someone official." "I can arrange that," Ed said. "And Ed." "Yes?" "Make sure Renata gets a copy of the filing," I said, "as a courtesy." There is a moment in Finnish carpentry when the work reveals itself. You have been building for days or weeks, measuring, cutting, fitting, adjusting, doing things that individually look like nothing. And then you step back, and the thing is suddenly visible as a whole. The proportions are right. The grain runs the right direction. The joints are invisible. The room has become something it wasn't before. That is what the next 2 weeks felt like. Not dramatic, not loud. Just the slow, incremental revelation of a structure that had been there all along, being seen for the first time. The DA's office moved faster than I expected. Raymond's documentation was thorough enough that the investigator assigned to the case, a woman named Detective Chen, who had the particular focused stillness of someone who has seen a great many things and stopped being surprised by them, told Ed that it was one of the most complete financial fraud packages she had received from a private investigation. She said it like a compliment, and I took it as one, because Raymond Carr was a careful man doing careful work, and in my experience, careful work deserves acknowledgement. Marcus was notified of the investigation on December 12th. He called me that evening. I let it ring. He called again the next morning. I answered. "Walt," he said. His voice was the same as always, smooth, confident, the voice of a man who had never, in his own accounting, been wrong. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "About what?" I said. "About some paperwork. Some documents that have apparently been misread or—" "Marcus," I said. He stopped. "The account at the Bellevue Credit Union," I said. "The one opened in my name in April of 2021. What's the misunderstanding there?" Silence. "The power of attorney dated August of 2022, I said. "The one I signed in a county I've never visited. What's the misunderstanding there?" More silence. "The 6 transfers," I said, totaling $41,230, moved from an account I didn't open to a firm I never retained. What's the misunderstanding there?" He breathed. "Walt," he said, and his voice had changed. Still smooth, but differently smooth now. The smoothness of a man reaching for purchase on a wet surface. I know how it looks," I said. "I've been doing finish work for 39 years. I know the difference between a mistake and a design." Another silence, longer this time. "I'd like to talk," he said. "In person." "That's not going to happen," I said. "If you want to talk, you talk to Ed Nakamura. His number is on file." I ended the call. I picked up my coffee. It was still hot. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the raised beds Dorothy had built, empty now in December, the frames weathered gray, the wire mesh holding nothing. I thought about her garden. I thought about how she'd planned it. Not the way Marcus planned things, which was to extract something, but the way she planned things, which was to put something in the ground and come back in the summer and find more than you'd left. I thought about how I'd kept planting her tomatoes for 3 years after she died, because I didn't know what else to do with the bed she'd built. And I thought, next spring, I'll plant something different. Claire came to see me on December 19th. I had not called her. She came on her own, which Ed had predicted she might. The DA's investigator had spoken with her 2 days earlier, and whatever was said in that conversation had apparently moved her to action. She drove 4 hours from Bellevue, and she knocked on my front door at 2 in the afternoon, and when I opened it, she looked like what she was, which was a woman who had not slept in several days, and who was carrying something very heavy, and had run out of places to put it down. She said, "Dad." I said, "Come in." I made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She wrapped her hands around the mug, one of the plain white ones Dorothy had bought at a restaurant supply store because she liked the weight of them. And she looked at the table, and then she looked at me. "I need to tell you what I knew," she said. "Okay," I said. "And I need to tell you when I knew it." "Okay." She took a breath. She told me. She had known about the partnership agreement, the one with my name on it, since the previous January. Marcus had told her it was a formality, that he'd needed a co-signer to complete the fund structure, that the money was already there, and I would see the returns. She had believed him, or had believed him enough to say nothing, or had needed to believe him because the alternative was a thing she was not yet ready to look at. She had not known, she said, about the power of attorney. She had not known my signature had been forged on any document. She had not known about Patricia Okoye or the other investors, not by name, not specifically. She had known that Marcus had clients whose money he managed, and she had not asked questions because she was afraid. She used that word, afraid, of what the questions would uncover. She had referred those clients to Marcus, 3 of them, old connections of hers, friends of friends, parents of former students, acquaintances who had mentioned, in passing, that they were looking for investment guidance. She had given them Marcus's card. She had not known, she said, what he would do with the introductions. I listened to all of this. When she was finished, I was quiet for a moment. The coffee was good. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the December light was flat and gray, and there were no birds at the feeder, which was empty. "Claire," I said, "I want to ask you something." She looked at me. "That Thanksgiving dinner," I said, "when Renata made her joke, when she said I was broke."
You looked down at the pie. Her jaw moved. Did you look down because you were embarrassed? Or because you knew something? She didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. Both, she said, finally. I nodded. I need you to cooperate fully with the investigators, I said. Everything you know, every conversation, every document you've seen, every client referral, all of it. I am, she said. I already told them. Everything, I said. She nodded. And the other people, I said. Patricia Okoye, the man in Redmond, the couple in Kirkland. You need to understand that they lost money they cannot recover. That the thing you were afraid to look at, they're living inside of it. Her eyes filled. She didn't let it spill. I know, she said. Good, I said. I got up and refilled both our coffees. I put the carafe back. I sat down. I'm not going to pretend, I said, that this is something we fix quickly. What you knew and when you knew it, and what you said nothing about, that's not a small thing, Claire. Your mother's name deserves better than that. My name deserves better. She was crying now, quietly, the way her mother had cried. Contained, dignified, like water running along a channel it had cut itself. I know, she said. But I'm your father, I said. And that's not a thing that changes based on what you do. We sat for a while. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee was good. Eventually, she said, What are you going to do with the house? I looked at her. Marcus asked about it, she said, when we were first married. He wanted to know what it would appraise for. I told him I didn't know. He said... She stopped. He had plans for it, I said. I think so, she said. I think it was part of something longer, something he'd been thinking about since before you were married, I said. She looked at her hands. Maybe, she said. I thought about that. I thought about the timeline. June of 2021, 14 months after Claire and Marcus had married. Account opened in my name. Scheme already in motion. And before that, the courtship, the wedding, the introduction to a daughter whose father owned a paid-off house in a neighborhood that had become, as Marcus had put it, something worth looking at. The house, I said, is fine. It's going nowhere. She nodded. Where are you staying? I said. A hotel, she said, in Spokane. I thought about that. You can stay here, I said. Guest room. Your mother's quilts are still in the closet. She looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, or grief, or both, running together the way things do when the distance between them collapses. Are you sure? She said.
I'm not sure about most of what's happening, I said. I'm sure about that. Marcus Holt was arrested on January 14th. The charges included forgery, identity theft, wire fraud, and investment fraud affecting multiple victims. He was released on bail 4 days later. I know this because Raymond told me, and because Ed told me, and because the Bellevue legal blogosphere, which apparently is a thing that exists, covered it briefly. I did not follow the coverage. I had work to do. The civil suit was filed in January. Patricia Okoye's attorney and Ed coordinated. The amount sought was substantial. The preliminary hearing was set for March. I attended one preliminary meeting in person and conducted the rest by phone. In February, Claire filed for divorce. She moved back to Spokane. She got a job at a school on the north side. Not middle school, not science, but 3rd grade. She said the age felt right for now. She said she wanted to be around kids who still thought the world was mostly good. She is living, for the time being, in my guest room. We have dinner together 2 or 3 times a week. On Sunday mornings, she drinks coffee with me at the kitchen table. She does not call it therapy. I do not call it anything. She cooperated fully with the investigation. Her testimony, Ed says, was consequential. The DA considered her cooperation extensively in their assessment of her role. She has not been charged. I do not know if that is justice exactly, but I know it is something. Marcus, at last report, has retained 3 different attorneys and fired 2 of them. His business partner, Devlin, who had also invested client funds through the same structure, has cooperated with investigators and is seeking a separate resolution. Patricia Okoye's case proceeds. The retired couple in Kirkland have retained their own counsel. The man in Redmond, a widower named George, whom I have never met but think about more than I would expect, is owed an amount he may never fully recover. That is the part that does not resolve cleanly. I know that. I think about George in Redmond. I think about the particular cruelty of building something careful and trusting it to someone who saw your caution as a vulnerability and your trust as a mechanism. I think about Dorothy's garden, which is not a metaphor, but which is also, somehow, one. The ledger is still on my desk. I have not put it back in the drawer. Dorothy gave it to me at an office supply store in 1986. She bought it because I was losing receipts. She said, "Keep everything in here. You'll be glad someday." She did not say which someday. She didn't need to. That was how she worked. She prepared for the someday she couldn't see yet, and she trusted that preparation. And she was right. I have started a new section in the ledger. After all the financial entries, after all the job invoices and account records and bank statements, I have started writing notes. Not about money, about what I know and when I knew it. About the timeline of things. About what George in Redmond is owed, and what progress looks like in a case that moves like a river and not like a flood. It is, I think, the most important section I have ever kept. On the first Sunday in April, Claire brought coffee to the kitchen table before I got there. She had made it a little too strong, the way her mother used to make it when she was distracted. And I drank it without saying anything, because it tasted like the house used to taste. And some things are worth having, even at the wrong strength. The backyard was greening up. The raised beds Dorothy built were there in the corner, weathered gray, empty. "Are you going to plant anything this year?" Claire asked. I looked at the beds. I thought about Dorothy's tomatoes, which I had planted for 3 years because I didn't know what else to do with the space she had left behind. "Something different," I said. Claire looked out the window. "What?" "I'll know when I plant it," I said. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She understood. Her mother's daughter in that way, at least. that some things don't need to be named before they can be true. I drank my coffee. It was too strong, and it was exactly right. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the April light was coming in low and flat across the raised beds, and for the first time in a long time, I was thinking about what I was going to put in the ground. There is a thing that happens in finish work when the piece is complete. You run your hand along it one last time. Not to check. You have already checked. You run your hand along it because the hand knows what the eye can't quite measure. The smoothness, the grain, the particular rightness of a joint that has been made correctly. And then you put your tools away, and you step back, and you see what you made. Renata called me in March. She had seen the news coverage, a brief item in the Spokane paper, nothing dramatic, and she called to say that she was sorry about her Thanksgiving joke, and that she had always known I was a capable man, and that she hoped things worked out. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated the call. I did not tell her that her joke, followed by my sister's laugh, followed by my daughter's averted eyes, had been the last line of a paragraph that had been writing itself for 3 years. I did not tell her that I had sat in my truck for 47 minutes, turning a sentence over in my mind, like a stone I'd found on a beach, and that the stone had been the key. I did not need to tell her. She would not have understood what I meant. But you understand. I think you understand exactly what I mean. Marcus Holt underestimated me. He saw a man who drove an old truck and wore work clothes and didn't talk about money. And he made the oldest mistake a clever person can make. He assumed that quiet meant empty. He did not know about the ledger. He did not know about Dorothy. He did not know that a man who has spent 39 years working with his hands has learned, in his hands, something about patience and structure and the grain of things, about where the beauty is real and where the beauty is covering a crack. He did not know that I have always been the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who already knows and is waiting for the right moment to show you that he knows. The river doesn't fight the stone. It just keeps moving. If this story stayed with you, join us. Like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear this. And as always, thank you for being here. See you next time.